everyone. We are in the special business meeting of the District of Squamish for February 13th. Halton Squalon, Priest Squamish, Awayomeo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There is an agenda in front of Council. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Pryor. All those in favour? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. We have 3 public hearings tonight, or 1 public hearing for 3 bylaws, I should say. And prior to the public hearing, I will read a statement on the legislation. This public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act, to allow the public to make representations to Council respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaws. District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw setbacks and cash-in-lieu parking, number 2576-2017. District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw employment space, number 2577-2017. District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw FAR on Cleveland, upper story setback on Cleveland, and frontage on Cleveland, number 2578-2017. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to the matters contained in the proposed bylaws. Members of Council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of Council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, Council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the Planning Department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or actions of members of Council or any other members or any other persons addressing Council. And I'll call on the Planning Department to introduce the bylaws.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Carrie Hamilton, and tonight Elaine Nasby and I, and our Director at York and I will be presenting the proposed downtown zoning bylaws for public hearing. Laura Pinsick from the Engineering Department is also here with us this evening as well to answer any questions. So for the purpose of public hearing, we'd like to break this presentation up into a few background sections before presenting and summarizing each bylaw for you this evening. We want to highlight and honor the downtown visioning work that our community has engaged in over the last 20 years, as well as highlight the recent community engagement work we did over the last year, because both have shaped the new and improved bylaws we are presenting to you this evening. A downtown vision process took off with the Squamish 2000 plan. This plan was amalgamated into the Downtown Squamish Concept Plan of 2005. This plan was in partnership with Smart Growth and included several community engagement events and design charrettes. This visionary work was intended to become policy as part of the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. The work for this began in 2006 with several different iterations throughout the years. The one we refer to today is the final version of the 2014. This piece of policy was never adopted and has remained a draft for guiding development in the downtown core. Following 2014, a number of other plans that incorporated the downtown were adopted. They included an employment land strategy and an active transportation plan. Today, the new OCP has amalgamated the downtown neighborhood plan into downtown development permit area guidelines and land use policy to integrate years of community visioning work into one guiding document. The guiding plans of 2000 to present day OCP have all been reviewed to create the implementation objectives of today's downtown zoning amendments. So staff brought these original amendments forward in the winter of 2016-2017. Strong public concern and confusion was voiced at that public hearing, and the amendments were rescinded. Staff have taken the past year to revisit the objectives of these amendments, seeking public consultation and council direction every step of the way. Our first community workshop was held in spring of 2017, with approximately 50 members of the public participating in roundtable discussions. The workshop focused primarily on setbacks and employment space. A downtown zoning changes survey ran from May 4th to May 23rd, 2017, and 177 responses were received. Summer was dedicated to reviewing public input to develop revised and new zoning options. Staff consulted with architectural professionals and to review employment space feasibility, as well as Cleveland upper story setback and floor area ratio objectives. Presentations were made to both council and our advisory design panel at each step in the process to gain further comments and direction. We hosted a second workshop where approximately 40 members of the public participated in breakout group discussions. This was the first community engagement event at which the Cleveland character-related zoning changes were also discussed in detail. In November, we hosted a third community workshop dedicated specifically to Cleveland character-related zoning changes at Municipal Hall. 2 members of the public attended. So overall, the intent of the downtown zoning amendments is to align zoning regulations with the downtown policy and community vision. The first bylaw consists of 2 topic areas, setbacks and cash-in-lieu. The second proposes minimum employment space requirements in all C4 zones downtown, while the final bylaw focuses specifically on our Cleveland Avenue High Street, where 3 specific regulations are proposed to maintain and enhance Cleveland character. Although sometimes both are referred to as setbacks, to avoid confusion, I want to highlight that there are distinctions between the setback and the step-back amendments. We will take the next following slides to summarize each bylaw and its intention for achieving downtown policy and community vision, and this should likely clarify this distinction. These 3 bylaws were given first reading on December 19th, 2017, and following some amendments were given second reading on January 23rd, 2018. The setback bylaw amendment will provide space for development of separated bike lanes and a vibrant streetscape while maintaining on-street parking capacity. The bylaw proposes amendments for only properties along 3rd Avenue and Pemberton Avenue. 3rd Avenue proposes a building setback of 2.5 meters, while Pemberton Avenue proposes a building setback of 1.5 meters. The subsequent laneway setback is to ensure that most properties will not lose buildable area. The second part of this bylaw amendment refers to the zoning bylaws cash-in-lieu section. The map on the left is the existing cash-in-lieu map, and no amendments are being proposed to change the map. Rather, the amendments aim to update the cash-in-lieu regulations themselves. For context and clarification, cash-in-lieu regulations only apply to commercial parking stalls, not residential. If a developer decides to use the cash-in-lieu option, they can choose to pay for commercial parking stalls instead of providing these stalls on site. One stall currently costs $15,000. Cash-in-lieu funds can go into 2 types of district reserve. One, to fund the creation of new centralized parking, and another to fund alternative forms of transportation, both serving the downtown commercial area. Cash-in-lieu amendments proposed include a cash-in-lieu map area to provide revised edits to the cash-in-lieu map area to provide equity between Cleveland Avenue and the other commercial core streets. Increase cash-in-lieu options by 1 space for every 1 commercial space provided on site. And the Cleveland Avenue specifically, so this line in the blue, will change from removing the unlimited commercial cash-in-lieu for all Cleveland properties, but will maintain the unlimited commercial cash-in-lieu option for the smaller lots. And it will add unlimited cash-in-lieu commercial for lots with 100% employment space. The intention of these amendments is to provide more parking regulation equity downtown and providing more options to pay for commercial parking stalls off-site to encourage development of employment space. The employment space amendment bylaw was always aimed to increase the supply of employment space and promote downtown Squamish as the core of our community, in line with the vision for downtown. To determine what percentage of employment space should be applied for all C4 zone properties, we reviewed the amount of space included in recent downtown developments to determine what was feasible, and this is the chart that you see above here on the right. We landed on a 20% requirement, as this is close to the percentage amount seen in developments that have proposed second-story employment space. The employment land strategy and downtown neighborhood plan assumes a target of 0.45 FAR employment space. The strategy's supply-demand projections assume that development would follow the use and building types specified in the draft downtown neighborhood plan. However, recent downtown developments are not following that plan, resulting in significant less commercial space being built. The 20% amount attempts to create a space requirement that is more in line with the downtown neighborhood plan and employment land strategy, but is also sensitive to the impact this may have on redevelopment potential. Recent commercial space gap analysis completed by the Economic Development Department in Squamish found that the supply of commercial space in Squamish will be insufficient under both medium and high growth scenarios, even with the proposed 20% amount factored in. Considering this, staff recommend that the employment space bylaw 20% amount be reviewed regularly. So therefore, the second bylaw amendment proposing tonight would require that a minimum of 20% of buildings' gross floor area be developed as employment space for all C4 zones, which are the properties highlighted in orange on the screen here. Based on the feedback from community engagement, as well as from ADP and council, a flexible option was created that would require a percentage of a building's floor area to be developed with employment space, yet would allow the location and configuration of that employment space be left up to the owner or developer to decide. I'll pass it over to Lane to describe the last.
Good evening. I will present 3 amendments that relate to Squamish's downtown High Street, Cleveland Avenue. These bylaw amendments apply to the 3 central blocks of Cleveland, south of Pemberton and north of Main Street. The first amendment maintains a smaller facade height at the front lot line on Cleveland by stepping back the upper stories. The intent of this amendment is to maintain the existing scale and Main Street feel along Cleveland, while shifting the upper story massing toward the rear or back of the property. The angled step back hides the upper stories from the perspective of a person standing on the adjacent sidewalk to enhance the pedestrian experience and reduce the impact of taller buildings on the street. An angled step back helps retain views, and it also increases livable outdoor space for residential or commercial units that are above grade, allowing for outdoor patios or green roofs. So Bylaw 2578 would require that building face does not encroach within a 55-degree angle taken from the front face of the sidewalk. This angle was determined through the use of architectural services. The buildings would step back at that angle. So in this image that we see, this would result in a 14-foot step back at the 3rd story. The maximum height in the C4 zone would remain at the 6 stories, but the intent is that the upper stories would not be visible to someone standing on the sidewalk, so that the feel of the street would remain similar to the current scale. The second bylaw amendment relating to Cleveland Avenue sets a maximum width of individual commercial units at the street level to maintain the existing Main Street character of Cleveland by reflecting the historical lot pattern. And we see on the screen the original subdivision plan of downtown Squamish. New commercial units would align with existing businesses and position Cleveland Avenue as a unique shopping destination, supporting tourism and fostering local employment and small business. This amendment would strengthen Cleveland Avenue's current identity that comprises of small-scale, unique mom-and-pop shops and limits the presence of large chain stores, helping to create a compact, vibrant, and pedestrian-friendly environment. So Bylaw 2578 sets a maximum frontage width for new commercial units. The width for each individual commercial unit located at grade on Cleveland is proposed to be a maximum of 16 meters or 50 feet. An employment space located on the 2nd story, such as office or above, would not be restricted in width. The final and 3rd amendment for Cleveland Avenue introduces a maximum density regulation to the C4 zoned parcels that are located in those 3 blocks on Cleveland in the form of floor area ratio, which is known as FAR. Currently, as mentioned, the zoning allows for 6-story height and 0 lot line, and we are seeing applications that fully build this space out. A maximum density would keep the scale of development in these few blocks relatively lower, which has been the vision for the commercial core of Cleveland since at least 2000. It would help maintain views and minimize shade. It would make building design flexible so that a design can shift the massing on a lot to where it will have the least negative impact. And it will create a variety of forms and height, resulting in architectural interest. The image on the screen shows a mock-up of the proposed FAR. So the definition of floor area ratio is the amount of floor area in relation to the size of the lot. So the floor area, gross floor area, is basically all the usable floor space, and it excludes such things as parking, hallways, and stairwells. And so that amount of space is divided by the parcel size. Bylaw 2578 proposes a range of allowable FAR based on the lot size and the amount of employment space that is being provided. So it is structured in a density bonus manner to incentivize more FAR where more employment space is provided. So these images show potential building massing, examples of what can be built. The 3 buildings across the top of the screen are buildable on small lots, which are considered smaller than 6,000 square feet. In these images, the colors are color-coded. So blue is employment space, orange is residential, and gray is parking. The 3 buildings across the middle of the screen are buildable on medium lots, and the 3 buildings on the bottom on large lots, which are considered larger than 20,000 square feet. Because commercial parking stalls can be paid in lieu, for the 100% employment space building on the right, there is very little parking shown. So if parking were provided on site, the building massing for those buildings would increase. So this public hearing was advertised as required with 2 ads in the chief newspaper. Notification was provided to affected property owners, and 4 comments were received in written form, which council has. So the recommendation from staff tonight is that, subject to the public hearing, that the 3 bylaws presented tonight be given 3rd reading. Thank you.
I'll look to council. Should there be any questions for clarification purposes? Seeing none, I do have a speakers list, and I'll go through the list, but if you're not on this list, just please put your hand up and talk to the podium. So first up is Chris Hunter. When you come to the podium, just state your name and where you live, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
Thank you for your time. My name is Chris Hunter, 1001 Glacier View Drive. I'm a local architect as well as a small-scale developer in Squamish. So I see private clients come to me working in Cleveland and the surrounding C4 parcels, as well as myself trying to do some small developments in the zoning. I really commend planning on a few of the ideas in these bylaw amendments, most notably the FAR. I think is a really productive way to give architects the ability to design various solutions to zoning, different mixes of commercial and residential, while also encouraging smaller lot development, not just the big ones. So I think that's a really big plus we should support. The parking one is a challenge we all know about, but I think it's been a really creative application along Cleveland. I'd like to see that extended outside of Cleveland, the dashed blue line, so we can encourage more commercial employment space off of Cleveland as well. Because one of the deterrents is the 2 stalls per 100 square meters for commercial versus residential, a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square feet, 1 stall. So developers will just always default to more space, more sellable, less parking. But the major point of these amendments that I have major issue with is the step solution for reducing mass along Cleveland. I would much rather see some clarification on what is the right height to get us the density and the activation and the reinvestment in Cleveland, rather than what I think is quite a marginalized solution. it creates a whole list of problems that I don't think is maybe articulated at this level of planning and bylaws. Building envelope, structural, financial viability of these projects. What I think results in a really poor mix of architecture. We're going to end up with, yes, we want variety, but you're going to end up with 30 buildings down Cleveland looking at different sidewall configurations of each one of those buildings. And we all like the small mom and pop 25-foot, 50-foot grain of Cleveland. I think that's what's great. But you're going to see a CMU wall, you're going to see a metal flash wall, you're going to see an ugly parapet, you might see one good building. So although we like variation, I think there's some real tried and tested true lessons learned from lots of urban centers in Europe and Hong Kong, everywhere else around the world where you see 4 to 5 story heritage neighborhoods with full lot line street frontages. So I'd really encourage everyone to think about the 50, 60, 100-year ramifications of this one move of these step backs. I think it's a real undermining of our urban core in the long run. Thank you.
Chris, do you mind just answering
Sure.
questions? Thanks. Can you speak, your letter refers to a couple of things you talked about. Can you speak a little bit to the building envelope? And I know, for example, these setbacks won't be conducive to passive house standards and some of those net zero things that you talked about in your letter.
Yeah, so from
Maybe
like,
just speak to more specifics about that so we understand that a bit
Sure.
more. And you don't, and the other thing, if I may, just before you go on, is you talk a little bit about how we're not encouraging the green building stuff through this, and how may we address that
sure.
through this while still trying to maintain some of our sightlines and that.
So a building envelope, the kind of crude sense of it is the more in line our building shape is, the more consistent our thermal envelope air tightness of that building can be. So as soon as we step, that thermal envelope gets broken, becomes a really complicated detail to execute on site. Deal with thermal bridges, water ingress, and we're a wood frame culture. We haven't seen, I don't think we have seen a concrete 4-story building yet, which makes it easier to deal with water. Predominantly, we're going to be 4 to 6-story wood frame. So anytime we deflect that building envelope, we're exposing those buildings to more materials that we need to detail and install and maintain. And that over 50 years, to me, is a poor investment in a high-quality built environment. So if we want to get closer to net zero, which is where building code's going, or passive, we should be incentivizing ways and allowing architects and builders to build more refined, simple buildings that perform to a higher level. So those buildings can be passive, but it becomes incredibly challenging and even more financially arduous. So I feel like that one move might have some good implications for looking north and south, those two views, but all the other things I listed in kind of my lengthy letter, I know it's a mouthful, but it's there's a lot of ramifications that we won't see until this is built out. So my passion is durable, sustainable, long-term investments in our community and our buildings, and that means durable envelopes, and those are boxes more or less. We can still articulate, we can have terraces, we can have overhangs, we can have cornices, but let the architects design those spaces, I think.
Thanks. Anybody else want to? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Doug Day, and on deck is Bjorn Meyer. Just a reminder to state your name, your home address, and whether you represent yourself, a business, or an organization.
Doug Day, 1400 Vancouver Street. I just represent myself. Does that work?
Yep, that works.
I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective. Because I see this, the bonusing here is for commercial, you get up to, you go 100% employment space, you get almost up to 3 times FSR. If you can see long-term employment trends that we're just starting to see, in my opinion and in the opinion of others, offices as we know them and office space are going to be redundant. In most cases, office space is already redundant. Even lawyers and accountants and all sorts of people, they don't need to be in offices anymore. They still do it, they cling to it stubbornly, but they're not necessary. With the internet and iPads and smartphones, there's absolutely no reason for most people to be in an office to be employed. You could be on the North Pole and write a brilliant legal precipice for the Supreme Court of Canada, and you just don't have to be in offices. So long term, it's my projection and others that offices, even in downtown Vancouver, the big, huge office buildings in downtown Vancouver will eventually be converted to residential. We'll have small little pocket offices around the elevator court, and all the stuff around the windows will become residential. Offices are ridiculous for a whole bunch of other reasons. Number one is usually, in this city is a bit better. In Vancouver, you pay 550% more property tax on office space than you do on the same square footage of residential for the same assessed value. In Squamish, I think it's maybe 300% more. So there's a gigantic financial disincentive for anybody to actually work in an office and pay the taxes on an office, which is 300% more than the taxes on the same value of their home. So with the internet, it's all going to skew things differently. You'll find fewer and fewer people working in offices. Matter of fact, I think something like 25 or 30% of people already work from home or work in places that they don't have to go to an office. My daughter works for a huge company called SAP, a big German data processing company. She's a marketing director for North America, and she only goes to the office 2 days a week. And she works from home on the east side of Vancouver. The other 2 days or 3 days. Now there's one other thing of getting, so that's the big picture. So we've got this big thing. We're all been talking about it and thinking about it for the last year or 2 or 3 around. Oh, we got to have employment space. You know, the whole town's going to die unless we have employment space. We need people working. That doesn't mean they have to be sitting on the 3rd floor of an office or somewhere. The other thing is the rents on downtown Squamish are pathetically low. They've been that way for decades. And there's absolutely no way you can economically justify building any commercial space and hope to get an economic rent to pay for it. So that's another little minor issue. The other thing with, I think the architect dealt on it, all this setback stuff, these are going to be wood frame buildings by and large. Wood frame, and you're going to have, by setting them back like this, you're going to have water leaking all over the place. It would be a nightmare to fix these buildings or maintain them. That's why buildings go up and they have roofs on them. Nice pitch roofs are the best. So there's going to be some huge problems there that nobody thought of. There's one building in downtown Vancouver is designed by Arthur Erickson and built by a lawyer friend of mine, John Laxton. You can see it from the water. It steps back. Multiple sun decks all over the place. Probably 100 different sun decks. And that's a concrete building. It leaks like a sieve. Been subject to major litigation. It's a nightmare building. Anyway, you can't do this stuff, set back buildings like that and create all that potential leaks in a residential building underneath. So I think there was probably some good ideas here, but I think they're, by and large, I don't like them. And I think one more thing, walking along Cleveland, you did this, you're not going to create one single speck more view. By doing this, you're not going to be able to look up at the chief, look up at a seagull flying by. It's not going to create any more view, and it might create a marginal bit more light. But raining here half the time anyway, so that is a big issue. But I think, and I have no direct interest in this. I don't own land on Cleveland Avenue or on the other street, but I think it's wrong. I think it's well-intentioned, but I think it's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Bjorn Meyer? And that's all I have on my list, so please, if you'd like to speak to public hearing, just put your hand up.
I have to come to Squamish to find out. I haven't seen Doug Day for 25 years from Vancouver.
Lucky you. No. I couldn't help myself, I'm sorry.
Good thing there's a wall between you. My name is Bjorn Meyer. I live at, if you want that, 681 Mount Thor Drive in Cold Street, BC. My wife and I own 38065 Cleveland Avenue and have done since 1990. So we've reviewed the amendments as have been submitted that we have gotten, and we find good things as well as some problem areas. And I wanted to first touch on the FAR on Cleveland. And just as Doug Day was indicating, we have some problems with that as well. On an off note, I haven't seen a clear definition of FAR or FSR. I was quite conversant with that in Vancouver over 30 years, but what exactly is included and what is excluded is very important. Regarding the FAR itself, the fact that the developer must provide increased amount of employment space, my understanding is that if you have an FAR of, say, 2.5, and so forth, you have a fairly substantial proportion of residential. If you achieve 3, you have to go to 100% employment space. And as Doug himself said a moment ago, with the trend today going away from offices, and particularly for massive offices, I think that's going to be a big problem. The other thing is that any developer or owner, when he hears an FAR of 3, he always wants to achieve the highest yield for his land. So when he purchases a piece of land or develops a piece of land, he wants to achieve as close as he can to 3. And if he then is forced to put in employment space when there's been demonstrated little or no demand for it, number one, he could go bankrupt. Number two, he could decide to sue the municipality, or he has to scale back his development, which really doesn't do justice to the value of the land. So there's a whole bunch of problem areas that I would see out of that. But the biggest one, of course, is if there is limited demand for office space, then it's like shooting blanks. It's no good. We should bear in mind that there's almost always demand for residential land. And whereas the employment space demand varies with the economic times. And if you look around in most major cities, you will, particularly in the slightly less than prime areas, you'll see a lot of vacancy signs for office and employment space. So in what I might call an extreme case, you could end up with, on Cleveland Avenue, you could end up with a number of perhaps stepped back 6-story buildings where there's a lot of vacancies. And those spaces that are being used, don't forget they may turn out the lights and close and go home at 5 o'clock. And I always felt that what this town was starting to get towards, striving towards, was a livable town where people live upstairs, shop downstairs, and they can mingle, go to the theaters, go to the restaurants, and so on, after hours. This is what we've talked about here before, and I think stressing the FAR a little bit too much with commercial space, I think is going to obscure that desire or that goal. On the question of parking, the cash-in-lieu, as far as I know, has been a good cash cow for the municipality for many years, and I have never seen a number of how many spaces have been sold and how many spaces have actually been provided. All I know is that every time I try to find a space on that one city lot, I know that it seems to be full. So I'm just throwing that out, how many spaces have been provided, and the proposals here would do away with a lot of on-site parking, and perhaps it's a question of whether the people of Squamish are ready for a lot of off-site parking. It seems to me if the district wants to follow its own proposals, it should have to get building a sizable parking structure rather soon. Just a brief comment about the upper stories setback. Previous speakers have spoken far more knowledgeably about that than I can, but I certainly see that could help soften the visual impressions of the skyline, although I think even if you step back, if you get a bunch of 6-story buildings, even if they are sloped back, I think they're still going to be great big hulking creatures and still going to seem a little harsh on the relatively small confines of the downtown Squamish. Excuse me. Finally, there's been much back and forth at the City Hall over the last few years, and to me, to many of us, I think one of the worst was the dispute about 2-story maximum height on Cleveland. And certainly, I think that managed to get both business and property owners upset. And then it's shown to me, it's shown the importance of the City Hall connecting and communicating with both the business owners and the property owners. And it needs mentioning again, I think that over the years, we've had, I don't know how many planners and planning philosophies and so forth, and each planner leaves with certain marks left behind. On the other hand, you have the business of property owners who very often stick around for 10, 20, 30, 40 years or forever. And generally, they take a long-term view of stability and certainty for the uses of their property and the values. So sometimes you end up with a bit of a dispute between those two parties. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Good.
I don't have anyone else on my list, but if someone would like to speak at this public hearing, I'll go to the public. I don't see any hands. We're not closing. Okay, come on up. State your name and street address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
I don't have a lot. I've just sort of been making notes on the fly here. My name is Alex Sabar. I live in Vancouver, and I have a substantial frontage on Cleveland Avenue. Basically, I like what I see. However, these are my concerns. The architect gentleman.
Wait, you're speaking to council, so
yeah. I think we need to think about merging the residential and office definition, because the comments that were given tonight about offices not being redundant, I don't really think that's true 100%. I think what happens is that when people use their homes as offices, they need more square footage in their homes to do their work. I experienced that myself. I reserve part of my home as my home office, and a substantial part of my home is my home office for files, for workspace, just to move around. And I find that if you're isolated in your own office, in your home, you get lonely. It's nice to have people around you occasionally to trade ideas, to collaborate, to grow, and to be creative. And so the concept of a larger office is not totally obsolete. It will always be there. It always has been there. And I think it won't really be obsolete. The larger companies that employ hundreds of people, they have huge offices. And there's no sign of them getting any smaller anytime soon, even if a lot of their people work from their homes and telecommute. Telecommuting has been a concept since the 60s. The setbacks, I think, are doable. The 55 or 50 degree slope, I think, is doable. Given the architectural challenges, for building envelope. I think with developments in new materials, architects and engineers who have to certify these buildings can be creative in how to seal them properly and make the heat loss minimal so that in winter they don't get freezing cold and in the summer they don't get burning up hot. Parking regulations, again, I kind of like what I see, but I think it could be modified if residential and office definitions were merged. Regarding 6 stories, my gut says that's too high, but the setbacks might help. As far as I'm concerned, the vote is out. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. I'll go back out to the public. If there's anyone else like to speak to the public hearing, just so you understand the process, we're going to keep the public hearing open as long as people still want to speak, but if I don't see a hand, I may have staff answer some questions that have been asked. Council can have an opportunity to ask questions as well. And we'll make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak if they so wish. I'll just ask one more time. Don't see any. Yeah, come on up.
Hi, Chris Hunter again. I'm an architect in the community on 001 Glacier View Drive. I think some really good points got brought up in the few speakers that were there. The live work one's something that always does come up. Building code wise and bylaw wise, business licensing, it seems a challenge to recognize live work space as employment space. But that said, I think we look at how our work communities and work share places have changed in the past decade alone, and we're really shortchanging ourselves if we're mandating or being too prescriptive about where office should be in these blocks, especially along Cleveland. So again, I think if we can build higher density, lower height, better quality, better longevity of these buildings, then when work changes, to not have any, we talked about self-driving cars, we talked about car share, those things can adapt. Look at warehouse buildings in Gastown. Those are 4-story, post and beam, open floor plan. They've gone from warehouses to factories, to offices, to residential, to a mix in between. Dead simple, square buildings made out of wood. We're trying to do too much, so I think intentions are really good in here, and there's a lot of good ideas, but I think we need to just pare back and not be so conservative. Let's build a dense, high-performance downtown. That's where we should go.
Thank you. Come on up, state your name. Thank you.
Doug Day, 1400 Vancouver Street. I'll be brief because I've already spoken. I've been developing in Squamish for 15 years, and I think I've made a pretty sizable impact on different things I've done. I have not had an office per se since for 20 years. I have not had an office. I work out of the back of my car, I work out of the basement, I work out of the back of my boat. I have not had 1 single square foot of office space in almost 20 years. And I have this thing about it that I'm not going to pay somebody 500% more in property taxes for me to sit down at a desk and work. And I think this is going to be the wave of the future. Notwithstanding this gentleman that just spoke, I think there's what's happening right now is the tip of the iceberg. It's happening, and it's going to keep happening. Law firms don't need to have offices. It's crazy. They have 50 lawyers in a law firm, all practicing law. They do it at home. They do it on the back of their boat. They all have their own word process. They're doing all their own work. You need, so you have the community thing that this gentleman was talking about. The way I see a big law firm, for example, running in the future is they'd have a very small space. They'd have a boardroom, a few meeting rooms, and accounting staff, and all the lawyers would be working in coffee shops. They're working on their boats. They're up at Whistler in the roundhouse doing their work. Offices are completely a waste of time, and they're excessively expensive. They drive up costs. They produce no value except maybe to the cities who's charging 300 to 500% more taxes. One other last word on water ingress. Architects and engineers have been certifying buildings for decades and decades and decades. That didn't stop the multi-billion-dollar leaky condo crisis that we're still dealing with. So with all deference to the architects and engineers in the room, there's just no way to effectively stop leaking in buildings, especially when you start putting multiple roofs on them because of all these decks that are going to be required. And part of the problem is not necessarily the architect and engineer designing it, but these things are put together by workers in sometimes very harsh conditions, and it just takes a few little mistakes here and there, all of a sudden you got water pouring in. So it's not a perfect world out there. So this idea of introducing multiple decks and multiple ways of water to get into a building, especially wood frame buildings, I think is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak at this public hearing? Yeah, come on up, state your name and street address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
I'm Jay Clark. I live at 3773 3rd Avenue. I have a commercial building there. And we have setbacks there, and it's in the neck. Our weather here is so adverse and so wet, it's a constant battle to keep the water out. And they did a pretty good job of the original install, so it's been there for several years.
You're talking, the one down.
Down here on 3rd, my commercial building there. And, you know, at the Cash-in-lieu parking spots, they fully gauged. They should have parking on site. That's my own opinion. What was the other thing Doug said? Office space. You know, when you're in the service industry, you have to have an office. So I've had an office my entire lifetime. Anybody that's in the service industry needs an office. So there is a need for offices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak at this public hearing? I'll go quickly to staff. There were a number of questions. Did you want to take a stab at them, and I'll see if you caught one?
Okay, I've got a list of questions.
The floor area ratio is on the slide up there, and I know there were some questions about definitions, so did you want to quickly do that one?
Sure. So there's a general definition of a floor area ratio on the screen. In Squamish, it's a little bit more nuanced than in other jurisdictions in that we exclude parking and any common areas from that calculation. So in Squamish, a lower FAR would mean a bigger FAR in the city of Vancouver or other areas, because you gain it's not a 1-for-1. It's not an FAR of 1 can generate a larger building than just a 1-story building, because we exclude parking, we exclude corridors, we exclude stairways, elevator shafts. So it's basically just the commercial space and just the residential units that are part of the FAR calculation.
What about balconies?
What about balconies? Balconies would also be, I believe they'd be excluded out of the equation.
Maybe you could go to the slide that has all the different FARs. So
Sure.
maybe just explain this a little bit more for everyone's.
So we have 3 different FARs proposed, depending on the amount of commercial space or employment space, and depending on the size of the property. So in total, there's 9 different options essentially. 3 options for every one of the 3 lot sizes. So for a small lot, an FAR of 2 means that 25% has to be commercial space. An FAR of 2.25 means that a 30% minimum requirement would have to be employment space. And then an FAR of 3 for commercial buildings. So if the whole building is a commercial building, and you'll see that the parking requirements reflected in this depiction at the top there show very little parking because there currently is an allowance to buy out your commercial space.
Just to clarify for people, the white is parking.
Yes, the white is parking, the blue is employment space, and the yellow is the residential. Now for the developments that propose 100% commercial, right now on Cleveland Avenue you can buy out all of your commercial. What we're recommending is that we maintain that requirement and add a requirement to have on-site accessible stalls. So we are introducing a decrease of what you'd be able to buy out right now. And it is really to facilitate that development that is 100% commercial on Cleveland Avenue. For medium-sized lots, it's FAR of 1.75, and 25% of it has to be employment space. And then it goes up to 30% if you want an FAR of 2.0, and it goes to 275 for 100% employment space, and the same parking standards apply. For large lots, it's FAR of 1.5 for 25%, FAR of 175 for 30, and then FAR of 2.5 for 100%. And the FAR for these large lots is quite a bit lower, and that is because these lots can accommodate a lower FAR, yet have a 6-story building on them, as we've seen with a recent proposal for the teardrop, which was about a 1.5 FAR on a large lot.
Jonas?
If you have a question, you have to come up to the podium, so come on up.
Bjorn Meyer again. I just don't understand the logics in when you have an FAR of 2, 2.25, and you have a mix of commercial or residential use, and then if you want to maximize the use of the land, all of a sudden you have to drop all the residential and you have to go all commercial, come hell or high water. It doesn't make any sense to me. We're talking about a little area that we've been told that we're going to strive for a nice livable downtown where people can live upstairs and come down at night and mingle and so forth. And all of a sudden, if an owner wants to achieve an FAR of maximum FAR, he has to abandon all the idea of a livable city, a little livable town center, and have all employment space. And I know in terms of employment space, my comment on that is that of course there will always be need for employment space and office space, but the size of the total market demand for offices is way down compared to what it would have been without the technological means we have today. But I just don't understand the logic of it.
And I mean, yes, go, please.
If I may respond, the FARs that are proposed at 2 and 225, there are other restrictions than just the FAR. The parking really dictates how much floor space you can get, especially on these small lots where parking is a challenge. But you can't go to multiple stories of parking on these small lots. Whereas for commercial, because there are exemptions to parking or cash-in-lieu options, you can achieve a higher FAR. So that was the logic, to give the commercial buildings a lot more FAR, because we know we need to meet the future demand for employment space. We know we need more employment space downtown. So that's,
how do you know that?
We've done a study. We've done a projection, and by 2036, assuming medium or high growth rates, we run out of employment space unless we build it to this or some other model that is similar to this.
And just thought I'd point out that the actual building envelope is quite similar. You're just building commercial space in the parking space.
Exactly.
To achieve the FAR, a higher
Yes.
FAR. So your actual building envelope isn't all that much bigger in theory.
Yes, and from what we've seen in recent developments on Cleveland Avenue, it's 4 stories is realistically what we're going to get. I think it's probably unrealistic, especially on the smaller lots, to expect that there will be a 6-story building just because of the parking.
I think it would be far too bulky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if you could speak to the step back aspect and the building envelope and the building standards leakage setback.
Yes, I can speak to that. So we did consider the fact that, building a box is really the most cost-effective and efficient way to build. And that's okay in other areas outside of Cleveland Avenue. But what we've heard from the community on Cleveland Avenue is that the form and character is really important, and maintaining we have a history of 1 or 2 story buildings on Cleveland Avenue. Maintaining that character is important. I didn't hear from the architect, and we've consulted with our building department that it's not possible, it's unfeasible. It's going to be more expensive. It's certainly doable. There is no reason why you have to build it as flat roofs. You could, just looking at Whistler, there are lots of examples where the setbacks are achieved and you still have a pitched roof in between. So it's not necessarily a balcony all the way. It could have a pitched roof in between these sections, in between the step backs. And realistically, because we're especially on the smaller lots, we're going to have probably 4-story buildings at most with new construction. I think we're only looking at 1 step back to achieve that. So it's not going to have multiple step backs. It's only going to have 1 and 2 stories at street level, and then a step back, and then other 2 stories. Not every floor has to step back. It's approximately every 2 floors that we have to have a step back. And the last point on this is that the way the bylaw is written, it allows a variation through the development permitting process. So because it doesn't deal with density or use, it could be varied. So there could be a unique design that comes forward that addresses the implication on the street that council could vary when they're considering development permits. And in some cases, it may be legitimate. It may be a 3-story building, that could address that pedestrian scale for canopies and other design considerations.
If council wanted to, and I'll go to Councilor Elliott once I finish my thought on this. If council wanted to create some specifications for net zero or passive house standards, we could write that into a green building bylaw that could dovetail with this bylaw as well, could we not?
Exactly, yes. So our next project after the official community plan update is going to be a zoning bylaw update, and at that point we could look at incentives for that high standard of efficiency.
Thank you. Councilor Elliott, Councilor Chappelle, and Councilor Cameron.
A couple of questions. One of the comments about the step backs is that it causes different wall exposures up and down Cleveland, and so how does that get dealt with?
So yes, we do have already buildings that are built at 4 stories on Cleveland Avenue. So there will be variation, and some buildings might get a variance, others, taller buildings might not. I don't think variation is a bad thing. I think that can be addressed for our development permit area guidelines, which we're working on for the new OCP. So I don't think it's, I think it's something that we can address through design. It's not a problem that needs to be solved by adjusting the impact on the street a higher building would have.
And sorry, this started a while ago in terms of all of our consultation, but why didn't we take these changes all the way up to Buckley? I know why we didn't go south of Maine, but I can't remember why we didn't take it all the way up to Buckley.
I think because
So I can speak to a little bit of, well, this is maybe not the best. This is just to speak to Victoria, Maine, but this is just to quickly show that this is the downtown neighborhood plan, and this was always been through a lot of the policy and the plans that we've had since 2000 has been intended to be the Cleveland commercial, and it's intended to be from Pemberton Avenue to Main Street, so we wanted to stay consistent with that.
And what's the Buckley zone?
Buckley would be more so in the gateway.
The gateway, so between Pemberton and Buckley.
Is considered the gateway.
Yep. So through the chair, those are currently zoned industrial, aren't they? They're going to have to rezone anyway. Aren't they?
No.
No, this
Not
is
all of
all
them.
right.
Some of them are industrial. There's one large parcel that is actually C4.
I wonder if you can see this map.
So the yellow represents.
I'm not sure we've heard a rationale on why it didn't.
No, I mean, if one of those big lots up there is C4, we're altering the zoning for C4 south of there, why are we leaving it as is?
Because through consultation to date, in the downtown neighborhood plan and the previous plans, it was always the kind of, don't want to say heritage, but the Cleveland character section was always defined as the section between Henderson and South.
Thanks. I'm interested in the step backs as well. The difference in the efficiency of the buildings. Why wouldn't we just be encouraging flat face? I mean, currently we have a variety of buildings, a variety of architectural styles, and they're all two-story flat face. So I understand the idea of having a view corridor, but not in a place that needs high efficiency and high density, and especially with having growth boundaries now where we have to fit density into the downtown. So every area that I've traveled to that has 4-story buildings has interesting architecture. I don't see having step backs. And the one thing with our climate, the inefficiency of building a step back is, I'm just not sure why we would ask for step backs instead of a lower. I would agree with the professionals on having.
Let's focus on questions. We're still in the public hearing.
But
Mayor Heinzman, through you, the rationale is maintaining that smaller scale for the pedestrian, maintaining views, allowing sunlight, and in terms of the density, our downtown's not very big, and there is a lot of density happening all around this 3-block stretch, and so it's seen that the residential density and all that life and vitality will happen, but that these 3 blocks remain more commercial, smaller scale.
Sorry, that doesn't really address the idea of, I'm okay with smaller scale, like 4 stories instead of 6 stories, but you're saying 6 stories is okay with step backs all the way up, which doesn't really achieve that. Maybe you get a view corridor one way of a little bit more green space, but it doesn't achieve anything for a pedestrian going 4 to 6 floors and stepping back. Whereas having 4 floors where you can have adequate space, living accommodation and office space in one building, and flexibility over time, as well as less leakage. I'm just not sure that the step backs up to 6 floors achieves the same thing as a better efficiency.
Just to clarify, I think Jonas just said that with the FSRs, the FARs, the way they are, we likely aren't going to get anything over 4 stories, correct?
That's correct.
So just didn't want to confuse people with the 6 stories.
Unless it's one of those big lots, which there are very few on Cleveland Avenue.
And that's consistent with what the zoning is today and what we've seen on Cleveland, given the small lots that we have. We do have a very eclectic mix. There are a number of 2-story buildings, but there are a number of 4, and there are a few that have been proposed that have gone through. Some of them propose a firewall, so right to the lot line. Some of them, especially at the residential level, are actually setting back 1.5 meters, which allows for some windows and some of that. And so as this kind of builds out, because there was some conversation around how those setbacks will look over time, one of the big things that we've done here is made sure that this is a consistent angle. So because we have a consistent streetscape, this angle will actually be taken from the same spot every time, so you will have a consistent setback on the 2nd story. The variation that some of the speakers have spoke to today will happen at the 5th or 6th story, most likely, and that's where the variation that you might see is if there is a firewall proposed. But likely with the densities that we've looked at here, you won't likely see these buildings maxing out to the sides every time. They will likely have those windows, they will set back 1.5 meters. So we'll have a nice variation in the top, but we'll have a consistent streetscape on the bottom for those first 2 stories. And the idea again is that this step back won't be for all the other areas that are redeveloping in the downtown right now. It's just specifically for this unique area which we're trying to maintain as our high street, which we've heard from the community and we've heard from all the engagement that we've done.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks. Well, just about everything I was going to ask has been asked. You know, 3 blocks. I really like it when I heard varied. I always like it when there's an opportunity. Jonas, you said that if somebody came in with something that varied from what this was saying right now, it was unique, that they'd have a chance to bring it forward. And would that come to you, come to us?
Of course, like any variance application, it gives council more discretion rather than just a simple BP process, which would then require a higher standard for those buildings that want to vary from the setback.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And then another thing I heard was live work and on this 3 blocks, would we be able to put some wording in there for live work to consider some of the second floor office live work? I mean, would that work to make our high street more eclectic and alive at nighttime?
I'm not sure if that would make it more eclectic at nighttime. I mean, we already have a fairly permissive home occupation regime, like many jurisdictions. So, you know, there are lots of opportunities for people that don't have a lot of traffic through their office to have a home office. But we also know that we have a growing demand for office space. And downtown, especially this stretch of Cleveland, is an ideal location for it. That will make it more lively and eclectic, I believe.
Okay, then on the office space analysis, could you just go a little bit more into that? Like I know that staff did a lot of work on long-term office demands, and I've heard, you know, a couple of people, sometimes I think we're getting too much too, but can you explain that a little better?
So through you, Mayor, with the proposal that we've come forward with for the Cleveland character specific, or those 3 blocks, we have proposed the employment land strategy, and the downtown, it was based on the downtown neighborhood plan. And we did some calculations to find out that the target FAR is 0.545. And in this table that you see here, you'll see all of those 9 different options and the employment FAR it can achieve. And as you can see, with all of those arrows there are meeting that employment land strategy goal. So we will be meeting those objectives, and we're just not meeting it in 2 of those options right there, but we're just shy of meeting that.
But does that take into consideration 3rd Avenue and
So
2nd Avenue and all the offices that potentially go in there?
So through you, Mayor, the downtown neighborhood plan took into consideration that all the downtown would develop, as well as the oceanfront, as well as waterfront landing in that review of the employment land strategy. So it does take into consideration of that, but it does take into consideration with employment space being more than what we're actually seeing today, because we don't have a requirement.
But if everybody builds, like on the oceanfront and on 3rd Avenue and 2nd Avenue, the same amount of office space in their buildings, will we have too much?
As per what the employment land strategy is telling us, this is our goal that we're trying to achieve. So that we would not, we're right now leaning in the direction of not having enough rather than the opposite of having too much.
Okay, but we're just not focusing a lot more on this 3 lots or 3 blocks than elsewhere. It's the same across the board.
If I may, the employment land strategy, it didn't just look at downtown. It looked at all of Squamish.
That's what I was trying to say.
Accounted for the oceanfront lands as well.
Okay. And then the setbacks that you've got, and I guess I may be mistaken, it was 3rd Avenue, and is there setbacks on Cleveland or no setback?
No, there's only step backs on Cleveland, on those 3 blocks. Okay. Yes.
The passive buildings, I mean, Patty covered that. And the last thing, is parking a cash cow?
Not yet.
Yeah, hardly, eh?
No, those funds that are collected through the Cash-in-lieu can only be spent on a parking structure or providing more parking spaces downtown. And now we've recently have the ability of redirecting some of that money, some of the future money that we will receive to an active transportation or improvements to alternatives to car parking essentially, so which is active transportation. But whenever that comes forward, council will have a choice. Do we want to put this money in more parking or do we want to put it in active transportation?
Yeah, because, well, you know, I get beat up about parking all the time.
Okay, we're in the public hearing stage, so let's
Well, I just,
question.
you know, if we have a chance to explain the driverless car and how that affects parking.
Well, I think it's important that we come back in a year, or when we were doing the zoning bylaw update, and revisit some of these things. This is kind of new ground, and we're not going to get it all right. And I think the main objective of any jurisdiction should be to keep its regulations live, so that you're constantly adjusting and retuning it. And so I think this is a first step, and we will have to revisit it, and some of these changes, some of these sections might have to change.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back out to the public. Please come up, state your name, street address, and if you represent yourself, a business and an organization. And
I'm sorry.
let me just finish. And if we are getting redundant and repetitive, I will be cutting you off, but you have the floor.
Yeah, I still need a little more clarification of this 100% FAR, and I would like to perhaps, if I'm wrong, I would like very much to ask the audience if they feel, am I right, or is it wrong to
Yeah, don't touch the microphone. That's all right.
I'm sorry. Is it correct to be a little worrisome about if you want to develop a property that the city says to you, if you want to achieve the maximum FAR, you must provide 100% employment. You have no space for residential in that at all. Who is involved in the property?
Yeah, you know what? You can't, I'm going to conduct the meeting, not you. Thank you very much. If someone would like to come up and speak at the podium to that, they are welcome to.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And yet, would anyone else like to speak to public hearing? Yeah, come on up.
It's turning into a debate. Thing about 100% employable space, what my fear is that if we provide too much of that in downtown, we'll have what we have now when the stores close and when the offices close. It's a ghost town. Nobody is there. If we have living space provided along Cleveland, above the offices, or merge the offices into the living space, make it allowable for a person to have a few square feet, maybe a couple of tables in his home to have office space, then we can have people living in the area. People will be there all the time. That will, my opinion is that it will reduce the crime rate. It will make the usability of the buildings that much higher because they're used 24 hours a day. It will make it necessary to provide infrastructure, the services, residential and commercial. You will have a requirement in the back for delivery vehicles. Parking will change. This isn't a commuter town inside the town. People don't bike to work a lot. They use their cars because this is a single vehicle area. You can't get away from that. To have some residential mixture in the business areas or in the office space, I think it's necessary. You can't have buildings that are 100% office space. It will defeat the livability of the downtown.
No, you're good. Can I please see if there's anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? I'm going to ask for a second time, is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Councilor Carr.
Thank you. You know, it's just to help Mr. Barr out there, how many residential units do we have approved and how many units are in the downtown right now?
We have a number, in the thousands. The number, actually, most of our coming density is downtown with the waterfront landing, the infill development that we have, that's already been approved through the DP process downtown and the oceanfront.
Would it be fair to say 2,000 units right now approved for the downtown?
It's probably closer to 3,000.
3,000 units approved for the downtown.
3,000.
Question for the staff, just to help us recollect the conversations that went into developing these. The 100% employment almost came about as a density bonus conversation. Essentially, the FSR was going to be what it was for 20 and 30%, and council wanted to add one more density bonus option. I think the conversation went to the fact of very unlikely anyone's going to take us up on the 100% employment unless you have a scenario like the lawyers and the doctors that got together to build cornerstones, for example. And that, but we wanted to have that option to help create that opportunity, that type of opportunity. Am I recollecting that wrong?
That's absolutely correct. It was, the original proposal would end at the 225 or 2 or 175, and council wanted to see another density option, and so there it is. It's significantly more than residential, but it's also quite unlikely that we will see a lot of this development. We'll see a few of them come forward on Cleveland Avenue, but it's true.
And as you notice, the building size envelope is actually about the same. The FAR changes because you can take your parking and convert it into revenue space.
Exactly.
Thanks. I'm looking at this and wondering, right now we have employment on the second floor of Cleveland Avenue. That's office space, and we have some full employment buildings as well. In this scenario, we're actually removing employment from buildings in order to densify and only leaving ground floor retail unless you density bonus, unless you want to remove parking and add office space. So if you have 20% employment, it can all be on the ground floor. There's no requirement for second floor office space as long as you have, I'm just looking at the small lot FAR.
So through you, Mayor, with this option, we've really wanted to try to provide flexibility, and the realities are that parking is at the surface or on the second story with larger developments, and that the likelihood of all the developments that we have seen that have proposed close to a 20% are achieving that through second story employment space as well. So these diagrams are just, they're diagrams, they're not, we don't have examples of each of these buildings. They're there to kind of demonstrate in block form, but the examples that we do have shown that the 20% will likely achieve second story employment space.
But it can be anywhere. They can put the 20%.
And that was something that we heard from the community, that they wanted that flexibility. Originally, we had proposed certain depths and certain widths and required that it had second story, and we had a lot of pushback for that option.
Councillor Elliott, and then I'm going to go back to the public one more time.
I'm going to go back to my question about not changing the zoning all the way up to Buckley. And if we have a C4 lot there, that will be 6 stories right to the lot line. And is that what we want? And I realize there's some that need to be rezoned, but if there's a C4 lot there, why would we create this anomaly when that's exactly what we're trying to not do on the lower part of Cleveland? Why would we just leave that sitting there?
I can try to answer that. Again, we were trying to honor the public engagement that's been done to date, and from a planning perspective, yeah, it makes sense to extend that and capture that big property. But again, the engagement input that we've been working to date, and that's kind of what we've been going out to the public with, is that the key Cleveland commercial starts at Edmonton and goes down to, down to Main Street. We could amend this, but I would recommend that we do it separately from this bylaw. I think there's a lot of important pieces of this bylaw that we're not getting right now that need to be addressed. And we can always bring back a companion amendment to, to either tweak things in here or to add another property.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I move that we refer that to Community Development Committee so that we don't lose that?
Okay, we're in the public hearing right now.
I just want that in the minutes so it's there and I remember. I won't move it, but I'd like it to be referred to.
We're in the public meeting, so thank you. I'm going to go back to the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Oh, state your name and street address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization.
John Jervis, 2391 The Boulevard. I'll have a little crack at this from the commercial perspective. I am a commercial advisor, 20 years now.
Just stand in front of the microphone.
I'll just remind everyone that employment lands is not just office space. There's so much more that can go into that space that we end up building there, not least of which is schools. I was instrumental in leasing out pretty much Yaletown and Gastown when it gentrified. There was a lot of vacant space there, and I put in galleries, I put in schools, there were hairdressers on the second floor. There's all kinds of uses. So, and these uses actually, I've just had a tenant looking to go in downtown who wanted to do an activity center, which would actually liven up the street after hours from 5 to 10 p.m. So these types of businesses will move in there and they will charge up the downtown area, especially Cleveland. So I just want to say that your move to having the commercial spaces is very wise, and there will be 100% buildings come along. I have in the last 10 years had to turn away 3 large-scale employers who wanted to come from Vancouver and come here to Squamish. They really wanted to be downtown. They were in the range of 5 to 10,000 square feet. We simply didn't have options for them, so they went away. And that was really sad because there were jobs right there when we needed them. So anyway, I also highly support extending this up to Buckley. Let's get ahead of it so that we're not chasing the issue like we're doing right now with zoning that really isn't something that we want. So anyway, that's my comment. Next.
Thank you very much. I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? And I will ask for a third time if there's anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing. I believe we've addressed most of the questions that have come out of the public hearing.
I believe so.
Just checking. There being no further speakers, I'll just ask if council has any further questions. Seeing none, before closing the public hearing, I've already done that, sorry. I will now officially close the public hearing and just note that once the hearing is closed, council cannot accept any new information. And should you want to send more information, you must do so through staff prior to third reading. However, council can choose to address third reading right now. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate you coming up on this time. Moving on to the agenda, council can consider third reading of the bylaws that was presented, and I will look to council for direction on that. I will put forward the third reading of District Zoning Bylaw 2576, 2017, which is the setbacks for cash-in-lieu parking. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Black and Wolf. Go ahead, Councilor Brown.
There's a few things that I wouldn't mind. I'm allowed to talk to staff about it, right?
We're in third reading.
Yeah, I know. We're wanting to move to third reading.
We've moved for third reading of one of the bylaws. It is on the floor.
It's on the floor.
You can speak to that one bylaw.
That's what I'm speaking to.
Then go ahead.
And I'd like to be able to think about it and go down and see staff tomorrow or the next day and ask them a couple questions before I move to the agreement.
Okay. Councillor Elliott, so you'll have to vote against it, Councillor Perez.
Yeah, well, I will.
Is this the one where we waive 100% of parking for 100% commercial? Still find that part of this bylaw very problematic. I'm willing to let it go forward, but I still fundamentally disagree with large lots being able to waive 100% of their parking.
Councillor Spell and Councillor Rice.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared to move third reading tonight either, so I'm going to be voting against this. I also don't really agree with the setbacks. I understand the intent of them, but I really don't find any right now with, I'd rather have building efficiency and
Setbacks, not setbacks.
setbacks.
Setbacks, not setbacks.
We're not in the setbacks, that's the setback. I'm sorry, I misheard.
Setbacks.
But I'd rather have third reading on a different day, so I'm going to vote against this. Cash and lieu, the other parking things, there's a lot of things I need to think about. There's a lot presented today by the public.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you. So I like the setbacks on Pemberton and 3rd Avenue, and I think it will, as those streets develop, add to the attractiveness of those streets. And I am able to support cash and lieu parking, although I do agree with the speaker that the onus increasingly comes on the district to do something with those monies and create some parking alternatives, a structure or otherwise in the downtown area, because as this does unfold, I'm certain it will put more pressure on street parking and we won't be able to resolve it with just that. So the onus will certainly be on the district to make that work, but I am supporting this tonight.
Just a reminder, we're on setbacks, not stepbacks.
That's on setbacks.
And cash in lieu of parking in commercial. Councillor Guacamole, did you want to speak to it, or are you going to take that? Yeah, I'll speak to this one. I moved this one because I certainly didn't hear any concerns from the public with regard to setbacks. There was some question about the cash in lieu for parking. I think it's in extenuating circumstances if there's a 100% employment building, commercial space gets a cash in lieu, and as someone noted, it would actually generate quite a bit of revenue to actually build a purpose-built facility of some kind, parking facility in the future. So I'm happy to support this particular bylaw tonight.
I'm just wondering about, you had voted against this bylaw before because it didn't have 30%, and we were going to discuss 30% instead of 20% employment space in this one.
This is not the bylaw we were talking about.
The employment space versus 20%. That's also in the next, is that also in the
There's
next?
3 bylaws we are
Yes.
discussing. We are discussing the top one, which is cash in lieu parking and setbacks. That is the one on the floor right now, not
And the employment space.
not
And then the
otherwise.
bylaw, employment space, that's not the bylaw.
Here,
Bylaw?
this might be
Yes.
easier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the only bylaw that's on the floor right now is the top one.
Thank
You have to
you.
do them separately.
Okay, perfect. So the other two are going to come back in a different day.
They have not been moved.
Right,
Only one has been moved.
got it.
Okay. I'm going to call the question on
Thanks for
this one bylaw. The other 2 have not been moved. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pryor opposes. Motion carries. I too, on the other 2, wanted to think about some things. They have some variables that I want to get my brain around, so I wasn't going to move the last 2. But if someone else from council would like to do so, I will leave. You have 2 seconds. Okay, nobody's moving tonight. These readings will appear on the next agenda.
Thank you, staff.
Yeah. Just a reminder to council that we can't receive any more information from the public, and that any correspondence has to go through staff. And now I'm looking for a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed?